The FBI wanted the evidence. Sheriff Chris Nanos said no, that is not a theory. That is not speculation pulled from a Reddit thread or a true crime podcast with an agenda. That is the documented reality at the center of one of the most scrutinized missing persons cases in America right now. An 84-year-old woman vanishes from her home in Tucson, Arizona, in the middle of the night, and the two agencies responsible for finding her cannot agree on who controls the investigation. Nancy Guthrie is gone, day 46, and counting. Her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, the anchor you have watched on the Today Show for years. Her family has offered $1 million for information. Former FBI agents, forensic professors, retired homicide detectives, and ex-deputy directors have all weighed in publicly. The case has been called red hot by people who have worked cases at the highest level of federal law enforcement. And yet, no arrest, no proof of life, no answers. Here is what we know. DNA belonging to at least 2 unknown individuals was found inside Nancy's home. It does not match anything in the National CODIS database. The FBI wanted that DNA sent to their lab at Quantico, where the most advanced forensic infrastructure in the country could process it. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County sent it to a private lab in Florida instead. FBI sources, according to reporting at the time, described that decision as, and this is a direct characterization, dumb, insane. The DNA will have to be tested again. That is one piece of evidence, one decision, one point of friction between a local sheriff and federal investigators. But it is not the only one. And when you lay them all out, side by side, a pattern begins to emerge that raises a question far more uncomfortable than who took Nancy Guthrie. The question is, what has the person running this investigation been doing with 46 days? Stay with us. Because by the time we get to the evidence the sheriff's own press conferences contradict, you are going to understand exactly why former law enforcement professionals have been publicly, and by name, asking the same question. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in Tucson, Arizona, in a house she knew well, in a neighborhood she had moved through for years. She had a pacemaker. She needed medication for her heart every day. According to Sheriff Nanos at his own press conference, she could not walk 50 yards without assistance. She was not a woman who disappeared easily. She was not someone who could simply decide to leave. Her daughter Annie also lived in Tucson, close enough for the kind of regular contact that families manage when one parent is aging and needs watching over. The evening of January 31st was unremarkable by every measure. Nancy had dinner at Annie's house. She played cards with her family. It was the kind of night that does not get remembered, because there is no reason to remember it. An old woman eating with her children, doing what she had probably done dozens of times before. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cian, drove her home that night. The garage door opened. Nancy went inside. The garage door closed. Tommaso drove away. Surveillance footage confirmed all of it, time-stamped at 9:48 p.m. 2 minutes later, at 9:50, the garage was closed and Tommaso was gone. Nancy's Apple Watch was still in the house when investigators arrived. Her heart medication was still there. She had not packed a bag. She had not made arrangements. Nothing in that house suggested a woman who had chosen to walk out the door. The people who raised their voices first were her children. Cameron Guthrie, a military pilot, posted a video plea. Savannah Guthrie, who anchors one of the most watched morning programs in American television, did the same and pledged $1 million to anyone with information that could bring her mother home. These are not the actions of a family hedging. These are people who understood immediately that something had gone profoundly wrong. What they could not have known, in those first hours, was how much they did not yet know. Between the moment Tommaso pulled out of that driveway and the moment the family called 911 the following afternoon, a sequence of events unfolded inside and around Nancy Guthrie's home that investigators would spend the next 6 weeks trying to reconstruct. At 1:47 inches the morning on February 1st, the camera mounted at the front door went offline. Not a power outage, not a connection error. The camera was physically removed from the wall and taken. Whoever did it understood that footage could be recovered remotely, from cloud storage, from server logs, from the kind of digital trail that modern surveillance systems leave behind, whether you want them to or not. Taking the camera was a deliberate act. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., a second camera recorded a motion event. No video, just the signal that something had moved. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with her iPhone. The device logs that sync continuously. It stopped because Nancy was more than 30 feet from her phone. Her phone was still in the house. She was not. 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera belonging to a neighbor captured an unidentified vehicle approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home. The FBI has not been able to identify the make, the model, or the license plate. Not in 46 days. The camera on the back of the property recorded nothing that night. On other nights, it recorded normally. FBI sources, according to investigative reporting, called that fact, in their words, odd. It has not been explained. When family members arrived and called 911 around noon on February 1st, they found blood near the front door. Not smeared, not scattered. The droplets were round, falling straight down, the kind of pattern consistent with someone standing still and bleeding rather than moving through a space. Dr. Michael Baden and FBI profiler Jim Clemente, reviewing the scene, confirmed the pattern and the source. The DNA in those drops belonged to Nancy. There were no footprints intermixed with the blood. She had not walked through it. She had stood there, or been held there, while it fell. Here is what investigators have never explained publicly. Sometime between 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, when Tommaso Chillon drove away, and 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, when the front camera was pulled from the wall, someone was in or near that house, waiting. The question of what happened in those 4 hours remains unanswered. And yet a ransom note arrived at KOLD News, 13 inches Tucson, through an online portal the very next day. Then more notes, sent to TMZ and other outlets. The notes demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. The deadline was February 9th. February 9th came and went. No one paid. No one responded. No proof of life arrived. On January 11th, 3 weeks before anyone knew to be alarmed, a man approached Nancy Guthrie's front door. He was not carrying a backpack. He was not carrying a weapon. According to 2 law enforcement sources cited by Fox News, and confirmed through chip-off forensic recovery from the Nest camera's internal storage, he was there. 20 days before Nancy disappeared, a figure who would later match the description FBI agents would circulate publicly stood at her door. The FBI worked with Google for approximately 10 days to recover that footage. It did not come from the cloud. It came from residual data extracted directly from the camera's physical hardware after the device was taken. That process, chip-off forensics, is not routine. It is what investigators turn to when they need something that was never meant to be recovered. He came back on February 1st with a backpack and a weapon. On January 11th, he came alone and empty-handed, and he looked. That detail is not a footnote. That detail restructures everything. A kidnapping that appears to have been planned at minimum 3 weeks in advance. A man who knew the location of the front camera well enough to remove it before acting. And a ransom note, sent within hours of Nancy's disappearance, according to FBI agent Heath Janecki, contained 2 specific details about the interior of Fata Gauze, Nancy Guthrie's home that had never been made public, the exact location of her Apple Watch, and a broken floodlight in the backyard that only someone who had been inside or surveilling the property would know to mention. January 11th was a Saturday. January 24th, a date on which FBI agents later canvassed neighbors asking about unusual activity in the area, was also a Saturday. According to reporting by Cold Case Files USA, investigators noticed that the suspect appeared to operate exclusively on weekends, a pattern consistent with someone who holds a job Monday through Friday. The man in the footage was described as carrying a walkie-talkie in his jacket pocket. Jennifer Koffindifer, a former FBI special agent who has been tracking the case publicly, stated that the device was not a signal jammer. It was a 2-way communication radio. Her conclusion, offered as expert analysis: he was not working alone. There is footage of this man. There is DNA from at least 2 unidentified people inside Nancy's home. There is a walkie-talkie. There is a backpack, an Ozark Trail 25-liter model sold exclusively at Walmart, which the FBI has been working with Walmart to trace through purchase records. There is a chest holster, also from Walmart. There is a flashlight he carried in or near his mouth, according to forensic professor April Stonehouse of Arizona State University, which would make it a potential source of DNA from saliva. The evidence exists. It is specific. It is traceable. So tell me, why, with all of this in hand, has the investigation produced nothing that the public has been allowed to see? If that question bothers you, it should, Because the answer, when you look at who has been running this case, is more troubling than the question. Keep watching. Chris Nanos has been the sheriff of Pima County since 2020. Before that, he worked at the El Paso Police Department from 1976 to 1982, a tenure that ended not with a retirement party but with a forced resignation. During his time there, he accumulated 26 internal complaints. His resume, when he later sought public office in Arizona, contained dates that did not align with the actual record. In 2020, his own union voted 85-1 to issue a formal vote of no confidence. That is the man who decided where the DNA evidence would go. Richard Castigar Jr., a retired former deputy sheriff who knows how these investigations are supposed to work, told the Daily Mail that the Nancy Guthrie case should have been handed to the FBI at least 2 weeks before it actually was. His description of Nanos was specific, a classic micromanager, someone who holds on to control not because holding on serves the investigation, but because letting go feels like losing. What losing looks like, in practice, is this. Sheriff Nanos stood at a press conference and told the public there was no danger to the community. He said this on February 2nd, one day after a woman was taken from her home in the middle of the Talon night by at least one person carrying a weapon and a two-way radio. He said this while, by his own later admission, he already knew the motive. He knew it from the beginning, he told NBC News on March 12th. He knew, and he told the public there was nothing to worry about. Those two statements cannot both be true. He told reporters there were no names in the investigation, no identified suspects. At the same time, FBI agents were canvassing local businesses with lists of names and photographs. Not descriptions, names. The gap between what Nanos said publicly and what federal investigators were actually doing on the ground was not a matter of interpretation. It was measurable. The crime scene at Nancy's home was released to the family in under 20 hours after it was discovered. Television cameras captured blood near the front door. Reporters filmed what investigators had not yet fully processed. When pressed on that decision later, Nanos said, "Monday morning quarterback? Absolutely." A phrase that functions as an acknowledgement without functioning as an explanation. James Gaglianos, a former FBI supervisory special agent, described the case publicly as red hot and criticized the messaging coming from the sheriff's office directly. He was not alone. The chorus of former federal law enforcement professionals speaking on record about this investigation is not a background murmur. It is a sustained, named, documented dissent from people who have spent careers working exactly this kind of case. And yet Nanos held the last press conference he would hold on February 5th. After that, silence from the man running the investigation, punctuated only by a single interview with NBC News on March 12th, where he confirmed he had known the motive all along, and warned that the suspect may strike again. He knows who did this. That is what "may strike again" means, coming from the person who controls the evidence. If you have followed a case like this before, if you have watched an investigation stall, while the people responsible for moving it forward make decisions that seem designed to preserve authority rather than find answers, then you already feel what is building here. If you are new to this one, you are about to understand why the people who covered it every day stopped waiting for press conferences and started asking different questions entirely. Subscribe so you are here when this case breaks, because the people who know it best are telling us it is close. On March 10th, Jennifer Coffindaffer posted 2 phrases to X, formerly Twitter. She is a former FBI special agent. She has followed this investigation closely and publicly since it began. The phrases were, "half glass full" and "search phase is over." She did not elaborate immediately. She did not need to. Cadaver dogs had been withdrawn from the search on day 39. On day 41, Nancy Guthrie's home was released back to her family, following what investigators described as a final round of forensic processing. Day 45, FBI agents returned to the neighborhood, but this time they were not asking about strangers or vehicles. They were asking about contractors, about cleaning crews, about anyone who might have had legitimate access to the property in the weeks before January 31st. The investigation had changed shape. John Miller, former deputy director of the FBI, told CBS News that in his assessment, the crime went wrong immediately. He went further. The ransom notes, he suggested, may have been generated after the fact to obscure what had already happened. Not a kidnapping with a ransom demand that happened to fail. A ransom demand constructed to create a story around something that had already concluded. Paul Celino is a veteran homicide detective. He told the New York Post plainly, "I don't think she was kidnapped." Chris Swecker, another former FBI deputy director, stated publicly that he had serious questions about whether this was a kidnapping at all. These are not fringe voices. These are not anonymous forum posts. These are senior federal law enforcement officials speaking on the record to major news organizations, saying the same thing in different words. The frame that has been applied to this case from the beginning may not be the correct frame. Consider what the evidence actually shows. A man appeared at Nancy Guthrie's door on January 11th, carrying nothing, stayed long enough to observe, and left. He returned on February 1st with a backpack, a weapon, a chest holster, and a two-way radio. The ransom notes that followed contained precise interior details about a home they had no legitimate reason to know. The deadline of February 9th passed. Then February 9th, the secondary deadline, passed. No proof of life came. Not a photograph, not a voice recording, not a single confirmation that Nancy Guthrie was alive and in someone's custody. Tracy Walder, who worked for both the FBI and the CIA, raised a possibility that changes the geometry of the case entirely. The real target, she said, may never have been Nancy. The real target may have been Savannah Guthrie, her daughter, one of the most recognizable faces on American morning television. Nancy was access. Nancy was leverage. And if that is true, and Walder offered it as analysis rather than confirmed fact, then what happened inside that house on the night of February 1st was not the beginning of a negotiation. Jennifer Coffin-Daffer, whose statement about the search phase ending became the sentence that defined the shift in how experienced investigators were talking about this case, had said something else in the weeks prior. She noted that anyone who genuinely held Nancy Guthrie and genuinely wanted $6 million in Bitcoin would not go silent after a missed deadline. Silence, in a real kidnapping, costs the kidnapper everything. You do not stay quiet if you have something to offer. The silence has lasted 46 days. If someone you trust needs to understand what happens when institutional failure and a missing 84-year-old woman collide in a case this visible, send them this video. Because what comes next in this investigation is going to matter, and it is going to matter publicly. This is where the investigation stands. The DNA belonging to at least 2 unidentified individuals, found inside Nancy's home, does not match the national CODIS database. It will need to be retested after being sent to the wrong laboratory. Whatever timeline that delay has created cannot be recovered. The vehicle captured on a neighbor's Ring camera at 2:36 inches the morning on February 1st, approximately 2.5 miles from the house, has not been identified. Not the make, not the model, not the plate. 46 days of one of the most scrutinized investigations in the country, and the car that may have carried Nancy Guthrie away from her home remains unidentified. The FBI has continued working. On day 45, agents returned to the neighborhood with a specific focus: construction workers, cleaning services, anyone with a reason to have been inside or near that property before January 31st. That line of inquiry suggests investigators are trying to answer the question peak, one raised and never resolved. How did this person know where the Apple Watch was? How did they know about the broken floodlight in the backyard? 2 details never made public, 2 details that appeared in the ransom note. Nancy's pacemaker logs cardiac data continuously. It syncs to the manufacturer's servers independently of her phone. That data exists. What it shows has not been released. There is a man described by his alleged connection to this case, through investigative reporting, as someone with a 19-year relationship with a member of the family's inner circle, with prior convictions for theft and robbery, and with physical characteristics that reportedly match the FBI's description of the suspect, including a tattoo on his right wrist and a ring on his pinky finger. He has not been charged. He has not been publicly named by law enforcement. He is alleged, in the strictest sense of that word, and that status has not changed. What has changed is this: Sheriff Nanos, in his March 12th interview with NBC News, confirmed that he has known the motive since the beginning. He warned that the suspect is capable of doing this again. A man who says he knows the motive, knows the suspect well enough to assess their likelihood of reoffending, and has not made an arrest. The FBI has not commented on the current status of the evidence dispute. The investigation continues. This case teaches us something specific about how institutional conflict can become its own kind of obstruction, and it is worth slowing down to look at it clearly. When a crime occurs in an American county, the local sheriff has jurisdiction. That is the law. The FBI can offer resources, expertise, and federal authority, but they cannot simply take over unless certain conditions are met, such as kidnapping across state lines, which triggers federal involvement. What the law does not fully account for is what happens when the local agency in charge makes decisions that federal investigators believe are compromising the case. The choice to send DNA to a private lab in Florida rather than the FBI's facility at Quantico is not just a procedural disagreement. DNA retesting takes time. Time, in a case where a person may be in danger, is not a resource you can recover. The question this case forces is, what accountability exists for that kind of decision, made by an elected official, in real time during an active investigation? The answer, as this case has demonstrated, is that the accountability is largely public and largely after the fact. Former law enforcement officials speak on television. Journalists ask questions at press conferences. Retired deputy sheriffs give interviews to newspapers. But the person holding the evidence retains the authority to hold it. What this case teaches us about the gap between jurisdictional authority and investigative competence is something criminologists and legal scholars have written about for decades. The Nancy Guthrie case is not an anomaly. It is a visible example of a structural problem that plays out in smaller, less scrutinized cases constantly. The elected official with local authority and the federal agency with superior resources, pulling in different directions while the clock runs. The surveillance pattern matters too. January 11th and January 24th were both Saturdays. If investigators are correct that the suspect operates only on weekends, this is a window into how predatory reconnaissance actually works. Incremental, patient, conducted under cover of ordinary behavior. An 84-year-old woman living alone in a house with visible security cameras and a family with public profiles was not chosen randomly. She was studied. That is the part of this story that extends beyond Nancy Guthrie, because the systems that failed her are not unique to Tucson. Nancy Guthrie went home on the evening of January 31st. She had eaten dinner with her family, she had played cards, she walked through her garage door, and the garage closed behind her. And that is the last confirmed image of her in her own life. She left her Apple Watch on the table. She left her heart medication where she always kept it. She did not choose to leave. Somewhere between the moment that door closed and the moment the front camera was pulled from the wall 4 hours later, this began. And 46 days later, it has not ended. The people who knew her best have not stopped. Savannah Guthrie has not stopped. Cameron Guthrie has not stopped. The FBI has not stopped. And this channel will not stop covering it, as long as there are facts to report and questions that have not been answered. If this video helped you understand what is actually happening in this investigation, beyond the headlines, leave a like. It tells us to keep going. Follow so you are here when this case moves, because experienced investigators are telling us it will. And if you want to understand the full picture of how we got here, the video that follows this one picks up where this one leaves off. Nancy Guthrie deserves that. Her family deserves that. And frankly, so do you. Diversity Tracker Update. Hook style Vua Dung. The contradiction. Narrative angle Vua Dung. System failure. Emotional. Tone Vua Dung. Righteous anger. Opening sentence structure. 2 short declarative sentences in direct opposition. Stated as confirmed fact. Establishing institutional conflict before any character is introduced. The FBI wanted the evidence. Sheriff Nanos said no.